Hi, an anime that I like a little bit. I love. I'm obsessed with. I'm kind of named after is Code Geass. I love Code Geass. Code Geass is the greatest piece of media ever made. Okay. In my opinion, and I guess it could be some competition for that, but it's one of the greatest shows of all time. I feel like that is I guess people can disagree if they want, but I feel pretty strongly about that. But Code Geass, one of the things that really carries Code Geass is the plot. Code Geass has a I mean, since there's lots of characters, there's lots of storylines going around, so it could be considered multiple plots. But the plot that it has is just unlike anything I've ever seen. And a lot of shows have plots that when you see it for the first time, you're interested in what's going on and you like it and you enjoy it. And then maybe in a rewatch, you're somewhat interested. It's kind of like you know what's going to happen and you still like it, but it's not really as gripping. But there are shows that are just as interesting to watch as the first time, sometimes even more interesting because you know the characters better, so you now figure out more details. You realize how interesting they are to pick up on subtle details and all that stuff. So when I first watched Code Geass, I basically got like the kind of like basic things. Lelouch and Suzaku are these two childhood friends who both have very different ways of trying to change the world, and they end up basically becoming each other's enemy, even though they're actually trying to do the same thing. And it's sort of this complicated thing where Lelouch isn't necessarily a hero and Stalker isn't necessarily a villain. It's kind of this complex thing where it's not a simple hero versus villain thing. It's basically two anti-heroes fighting it out and two different kind of anti-heroes. Where Lucius kind of has that more sort of smug troublemaker sort of attitude, while Suzaku tries to have this sort of more morally responsible, mature thing, but deep down they're both basically anti-heroes and basically they're both competing against each other. And so basically that's kind of the big plot. And I kind of understood that, but there's a lot of other great details about the plot that I kind of figure out more of and discover more storylines. Like the first couple times I watched it, I didn't really notice that Detard Reed, and they ended up becoming one of my favorite supporting characters in the series. Has a great subplot about how he joined the Black Knights, not because he really cares about their college, just because he finds zero interesting. So if that's something I didn't really pick up on. Schneisel, his storyline is fascinating. I didn't really pick out that. And the first time I watched the show, where he's uh, really one of the biggest villains of the show and is very subtle about it. So I didn't even really notice him, but he ended up being this huge part of the show and was a great villain. Cornelia, I didn't even know who Cornelia was the first time I watched the show. I mean, I think maybe even the second time. I think after watching a couple times, I finally realized who Cornelia was. That's interesting to think of in hindsight because I love Cornelia. She's such a great character, uh, but actually, how much great stuff is going on. I don't even notice these characters that are so important to the show, and that could be considered a problem that I have. I don't know, but um, I feel like there's so much great stuff that it almost requires multiple viewings to fully get all the details, but I say that's a good thing because when I first watched the show, I loved it. And after watching more times, I pick up on more things. I get to love it even more than the first time, even more. And I was already a fan of the show. I was already really impressed by it. But as I watch the show more, I pick up on more details, and the show really does mean a lot to me. And the plot is amazing. It's one of the best plots I've ever seen. And the storyline with Emperor Charles and all that stuff about how he seems to be this one-dimensional pure villain, and they understand. And in a weird way, as the show goes on, they kind of explain where he came from, where he's obviously still an awful person, but you understand how he became that way. It's like all these fascinating details and all these really interesting characters. And C2 with her kind of being more in the background and then her having a bigger role later on. all this stuff. It's just so fascinating. Like characters I didn't even know existed. Like I didn't even know who Anya was. I don't like I didn't even know like why is this character like Anya and Gina? Why are they on the cover? I don't even know who they are. When I like the first like 5 times I watched the show, but then after watching the show more, I know who they are and I really like them now. And Anya has a great little a subtle subplot. It's like there's so much great stuff to the show. It has such a great plot. I love it very much.